Dear students, welcome to the course of Architectural Studies for Engineers. This is lecture number 21 and I am your teacher Ravinder Kumar Khyani, Assistant Professor, Department of Architecture and Planning, NAD University of Engineering and Technology, Karachi, Sindh, Pakistan. As you know that we are studying theme number 3 of the course Linkage with Construction Engineering. In this theme, we have discussed earlier the linkage with construction engineering, and today we are going to discuss the architectural restoration and conservation and its impact on construction. Architectural restoration and conservation and its impact on construction. First of all, it is important to explain that the phrase architectural restoration is quite uncommon and unusual terminology as given in the course contents. However, the factual term commonly known in the world is building restoration and architectural conservation. Within the theme of architectural restoration and conservation and its impact on construction, there are various intricate concepts that need explanations. For instance, what is restoration? What is building restoration? What is architectural conservation? And how these concepts came into existence and developed over the years. Why these concepts are significant. How these concepts are related to construction. How these concepts have impacts on construction. And what impacts these concepts have on construction and construction engineering. In order to answer these questions, let's begin discussing each topic one by one and then we go into its details. The first question that we have to address is that what is restoration? Restoration is the process of returning a building to its former state. The former state is defined as the state being known as earlier on the basis of compelling evidence without conjecture or guesswork. Restoration work is most commonly undertaken on historic buildings, accurately recreating its form, its features, and character as it appeared at a particular time while protecting its heritage value. Now, decay or alterations made to the building can be reversed as part of restoration works. So basically, we are looking at an old building which are having time over the period of time as there occurs a decay and degradation. So we have to improve the degradation. Now, restoration have aimed to achieve a high level of authenticity, replicating materials and techniques as closely as possible. So whatever technology was used earlier is now we cannot have the same technology as it was earlier. So whatever technology is available with us right now, we have to recreate the old building as it was earlier. So where necessary, modern work such as replacing outdated utilities or installing climate controls or alarm systems and so on. And these are undertaken in a concealed manner where they will not compromise the historic character. It means whatever the physical characteristics a building had earlier, we have to restore it and keep it as it is, and no new things should be evident or visible to the people. Now, there are various different conditions for assessing whether the restoration works are acceptable or not, or whether we are doing the proper restoration or not. Now here you see few pictures. Now these two pictures are telling us about the criteria and principles of restoration. When we are, for example, look at this uh, old building in the middle and how it is restored and appear currently. So as it was earlier a beautiful building, so now it is again after restoration become beautiful building. So there are some criteria and principles of restoration. Let's discuss the criteria and principles of this restoration. Basically, there are four main conditions for the acceptance or rejection of restoration work. Number one, the effect of restoration work on the overall heritage value of the building. This is the first condition, that whether the restoration work have any effect on the overall heritage value, or it is containing the same heritage value as the building had earlier. Secondly, the weight of the evidence for the need for the work. It means that we should assess that whether a building requires restoration or not, whether there is a need or not. Then whether the work respects the previous form of the building. So whatever form created by the original architect, that must be made intact. Then the fourth point is the implication of the work in terms of ongoing maintenance requirements. So whatever maintenance requirement a building requires, we should assess and then decide that whether the characteristics that was earlier must be restored or not. Then there are different principles. There are six basic principles that should be taken into consideration, particularly for structural restoration. For example, having sufficient respect for the original materials that were used in earlier building. Secondly, respecting the valid contribution of all periods on the building. Thirdly, the replacement of missing parts must integrate harmoniously with the whole. So whatever building is destroyed or you can say affected must be harmoniously developed. Fourth, addition should not detract from the building, its setting or relation with surroundings. So whatever the characteristics of the building was earlier must be restored. Here I can give you an example. For example, that we have Empress Market, which is restored currently, and you have seen the Empress Market that was earlier and Empress Market right now. And the current Empress Market shows the overall characteristics when it was made in early century. Then use of traditional techniques and materials must be there in restoration. Six, the modern techniques and materials are admissible where traditional alternatives are not feasible. So these are the six principles through which restoration works takes place. Now, in architectural restoration, there are various techniques of restoration. Here you can see a restoration work is going on in a building, but let's talk about the techniques of restoration. As far as techniques of the restorations are concerned, the restoration techniques can be classified as either reversible or irreversible. The reversible actions may be preferable as they can be subsequently replaced without damage to the original fabric. For example, if further restoration is required or if better techniques or materials are developed in the future. So whatever the restoration work is done in a building must have considered that it could be replaceable, okay, and reversible. Furthermore, a typical example of reversible techniques that are applied in a restoration works are provision of external buttresses or ties at arch springing, rings at the base of domes, pre-stressed unbounded stitches, anastomosis of the stone or marble monuments with dry joints, external ties, improvement of strength, stiffness, and ductility of existing diaphragm. So we must have some techniques which are reversible. If we wanted to improve, we can improve further and remove the earlier done work of restoration on the building. However, it may not be possible to use reversible methods for intervention in any building. And some intervention cannot be easily undone without causing the damage to existing structure. The typical example of irreversible techniques include grouting, for example, or bonding in of new bricks across cracks after grouting and cutting out to each side, deep rejoins, or rebuilding of a part of the facing of walls, or stitching of walls with pre-stressed rebars, or a reinforcement of masonry with steel bars, or connection of marble or stone parts with bonded dowels, or skin of reinforced concrete on masonry, or strengthening of the foundation. If we do all these things, these are irreversible. If we are going wanted to reverse this process, these processes, there will be damage to the building. So there are reversible and irreversible techniques. Now the compatibility and the durability of the replacement materials should be considered carefully in any restoration work. There are also other techniques of the restoration. So we must also know about the, as a construction engineer, we must know about the techniques of the restoration. For example, if we are having a brickwork and the old brickwork required special techniques, especially if these bricks are salted, or we have the old, you can say, brickwork along with concrete. So we must look into it that how we can restore. We must know about different techniques of restoration. So let's talk about the techniques of restoration. The techniques of building restoration varies with building to building or case to case. So let's talk about what is building restoration. Building restoration is a particular treatment approach and philosophy within architectural conservation and historic preservation domain of knowledge. It emphasizes the preservation of structures such as historic sites, houses, monuments, and other significant properties through careful maintenance and upkeep. The building restoration aims to create accurate depictions of these locations and protect them against deterioration that could make them inaccessible or unrecognizable in the future. In the field of historic preservation or building restoration is the action or process of accurately revealing, recovering, or representing the state of historic building as it appeared at a particular period in its history while protecting its heritage value. The building restoration work may be performed to reverse the decay or alterations made to the buildings over the period of time. So in order to reverse these actions which are happening to the building by climate, by people, by anything, so we have to reproduce the same character as the building has earlier. Now, historic building conservation is more about fostering a deep appreciation for famous building structures and learning more about why they exist rather than just keeping historic structures standing tall and looking as beautiful as ever. For example, if we have a mausoleum of Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah in our city Karachi, that building is very, very important historically. And we need to know about this building more than we have to restore it or conserve it. Let's go ahead. True historic building preservation aims for a high level of authenticity, accurately replicating the historical materials and techniques as much as possible by using modern techniques only in a concealed manner, where they will not compromise the historic characteristic of the structure's appearance or the historic appearance. For example, let's see some examples. In this building, we can see that the restoration work is going on inside a building as well as outside. And in addition, if you look at this project, here you see an old structure which is existing, and within that old structure, historic preservation took place of the wall that was standing, and in between a new building have appeared. So we have to restore the old structure as well as the new structure can be added. But both have distinction. The old and new should be quite visible in the restoration or building conservation work. So there are different types of treatments can be done in the building restoration or architectural restoration. Let's talk about the types of treatment in building restoration. Historic conservation is the preservation and repair of archaeological, historical, and cultural sites and artifacts. When dealing with building conservation, there are four main primary types of treatments or ways in which a property or building can be managed. Each one has their own objectives and limitations. These include preservation, rehabilitation, restoration, and reconstruction. All these four concepts or four these different techniques have or type of treatments have different application in different contexts. Let's try to understand what is preservation, rehabilitation, restoration, and reconstruction. There is a small difference between these different treatments of building. For example, preservation means or preservation places a high premium on the retention of all historic fabric through conservation, maintenance, and repair. So whatever characteristics that historically the building has must be preserved. In other words, all the materials added to a building over its lifetime are retained, and work is only completed when it is essential to prevent the deterioration of the site. Now, the next two treatments are a subset of preservation, with some variation to account for the different requirements of the building and needs of the institution. So sometimes we have different needs for the building, and the people who are asking us to preserve or do the treatment to the building restoration ask for different things. So let's talk about these different things. Rehabilitation, for example. The rehabilitation is more lenient standard of preservation because it assumes the building is so deteriorated that it needs repair to prevent further damage. It focuses on maintaining the materials, the features, the spatial relationship that give a building historic character and allows for additions or alterations to be made that do not destroy the integrity of the property. As you have seen in the example which I have shown you of a historic wall which was rehabilitated. Let's go ahead and see some more examples. Here is the example of a building where architectural restoration took place. This is building in America, and you can see that how restoration is taking place with old building with new materials, and the old characteristics of the building is preserved, or you can say that here we have done the rehabilitation of an old building. Let's go ahead and talk about the further types of treatment in building restoration. Now, the restoration is like preservation. It works to maintain as much of the original material as possible. So, restoration is a technique that focus on the present of the property at a specific point of time in history. So, the focus of restoration is to present the property at a specific point of time in history. As a result, the repairs and recreations of the certain elements or fixtures are completed, and anything which postdates the intended period is documented and removed. Then the extent of restoration is limited by the existing structure or proof of the pre-existing features that were previously modified. The design that were never executed cannot be included in restoration work. Then the other technique of or the treatment is reconstruction. The reconstruction is the most substantial type of treatment. It allows for the recreation of former sites, landscapes, or objects that no longer exist using all new materials. It is limited to aspects of historic building that are essential for understanding and must be completed on documentary and physical evidence. So based on that, we do reconstruction of an old building. Unlike the other treatments, a reconstruction must be labeled as contemporary recreation, as it has historic foundation but is new in construction. So with new material, we can create an old building or old style of building, and that is called the reconstruction. Now let's see some examples. Now this is a building restoration work going on of old building. There's another building, and here you can see a change that is taking place after the restoration work. Now one pressing question that always strike our mind is that why to restore a building? What is so important about it? So there must be reasons behind restoring a building. So let's discuss why to restore a building. The reasons to restore a building most frequently fall into five main categories. First, the building have a value. What is value? The building hold intrinsic value not only in the history of the building and how it was used, but also how it was built. The historic buildings, notably pre-World War II, are built with higher quality materials and built under different standards than the current modern buildings. Then the other reason is architectural design. Buildings have personalities, specific architectural elements that make the building unique and more valuable. So saving these unique traits within original building are ideal. The third important aspect or reason for restoring a building is sustainability. What is sustainability in building? Restoring a building for another purpose than its original intent is called adaptive reuse. So we can use the old buildings in new way and making it suitable for the current lifestyle or current trend. Financially, the businesses are better off restoring a building and adapting it for the modern use than constructing a new site. So we can save money also by using the old buildings and making it suitable for the new purposes. The buildings are often built to better standards and, as mentioned above, have unique architectural elements that can increase the business. So that is another reason of building restoration. Then another important reason is the cultural significance. What is cultural significance? One of the most important reasons that a site is restored is because of its cultural significance. Certain sites are tied to a nation's identity, making the site more valuable for for what it provides to the culture than it were demolished. For example, we have a building which is the birthplace of the some historic personality. Now that building become more important historically. So cultural significance is also important. Some buildings are culturally very important. Then the renovation of heritage building is essential to a permanent residence of history and culture in nation's psyche. For instance, we have old NED campus in Karachi, and we have restored that building and made it useful for current purpose. For example, earlier it was an old NED university, and now it is Department of Architecture and Planning. Here you see some example of the architectural restoration of old buildings. Stone is very important, especially in current time. For example, in Karachi, if you look at the old buildings, they're all made up of stone, and these were made in the British period. So stone restoration is very important aspect of uh, building conservation. Now, why to restore a building? Let's go ahead. There is one more thing, and that is one chance rule. When a building is demolished, what is lost cannot be measured. The site could hold one of the kind of design element or a historically significant past currently unknown. So that is another reason of restoring a building. The one chance rule is guided by the idea that there is only one chance to restore a site, and missing that opportunity could destroy a site of unknown significance. Although rare, there are times when a site would be or a building would be demolished or reconstruction is chosen over restoration. This decision is made primarily when the resources to restore the site are unavailable. The challenge to reconstruction is that there is an element of conjecture or guesswork in the process that can easily alter the site unintentionally. Another reason not to restore a building is the value and the knowledge that can be gained from the material remaining within the building. The Society for the Protection of Ancient Buildings has a unique approach to the preservation of old historic buildings, which focuses on the materials that were used in the building construction and what knowledge can be learned from the remaining materials. Here I can give you an example of Indus Valley School in Clifton, which is being restored, and it was reconstructed from an old building materials, and old building were demolished and material is taken to the new site, and then this new building is made with the new material as well as old materials that were used in earlier building. Currently, the architecture restoration and conservation work have become an industry. All over the globe, there are various industries which are developed because the restoration work was going on different projects. So there are different companies who do the historical work, and with new materials, they try to produce the old kind of structures, or you can say elements of buildings, and These industries are flourishing. For example, these pictures which you are looking at is of a terracotta company, which do work on terracotta, and these are using different techniques, modern techniques, through which they are preserving or conserving the old building. Another important aspect is there are standards of restoration. And what are the standards of restoration? Let's talk about the standards of restoration. One of the biggest challenges to building restoration is that each country has their own terminology, standards, regulations, and oversights, which impact every restoration process. As a result, there are no international set of standards. The conservators often follow the best practices in the restoration approach. Every restoration project will adhere to the standard that the property is to be used as it was originally intended. This standard will guide all other decisions in the restoration process. This would include which material are selected, to method of construction, and finishing touches to the building such as fixtures. The property being restored is considered a record of its time. Any work undertaken will only be to restore the site to a specified time period, and no removal of those historical elements will be made. However, this does not exclude removing elements not historically accurate on the site. Then there are international organizations that give awards to heritage preservation work. If people have done a good heritage preservation work, they provide awards. Here are some award-winning projects of 2020 in the Baltimore Heritage Preservation Award. This is the building which was preserved and restored and got a restoration award, and they have recreated the historical character of the building. Here you can see the internal halls, how the recreation work is done and restoration work is done. Here you see the old, you can say, element of a building are treated properly with modern techniques, and the result is a beautiful building. Now let's talk about the best practices in building restoration projects, because there is no single standard and each country have different standards of their own. It is also significant for construction engineer to know about the steps of best practices in building restoration projects. How the best practices are done. For example, the award-winning project that you have seen, how they got the award, because they are doing the work on based on best practices. So let's begin with understanding the best practices in building restoration projects. First step is analysis of the site should be the first step in the restoration process. The conservators will need to examine the site to determine its status and what changes have previously been made and what work will need to be done going forward, including removals. The extensive documentation must be conducted. This is the second step. This includes taking an inventory of all the objects and fixtures within the building. And photographing the building inside and outside is mandatory, as you have done the exercise of photographing the building from inside and outside. Every element and feature of the building must be photographed and documented in writing, such as their location and function. While this may be seem excessive, but this is the crucial step in understanding the site and what work will need to be completed. The third thing is, before any work on a site is done, a conservator will develop a collection management policy for the restoration. This policy will include a statement of purpose, a plan for the restoration, including a list of all proposed changes to the site and building, a list of the current collection of the site, and accessioning policies for new additioning. For example, let's see this project. This is a restoration project in Africa where a group of houses were preserved, and it was tried that the historical characteristic must be retained. For example, the stone floors and the walls and the context. That is important. So continuing with the best practice in building restoration projects, furthermore, the de-accessioning policies for collection items that will be removed during the process that must be decided earlier. The guidelines for the care of collection during the restoration process and section of ethical guidelines to follow as the restoration move forward. This has been done in the Indus Valley School, which I've given you the example earlier. The Indus Valley School have this de-accession policies. Additional sections can be added to the collection management policy depending on the building being restored, the items in the collection, and the historic significance of the site, which could influence specific restoration requirements. All materials from the selected restoration period will be preserved for restoration. This includes materials, architectural features, design elements such as paint or wallpaper associated with the restoration period. Materials and architectural elements not specific to that period will be removed during restoration. If a part of a building, fixtures, or design features are deteriorated, the conservators must first attempt to repair the damage. If the repair is not possible, then a replacement is made. If replacement occurs, the new feature must match the original in color and design. Ideally, the conservators will use materials associated with the time period. However, this may not always be possible. The best practice is that you must have a project which is being restored must have the original characteristic, even if the new materials are used. Here is the project in USA where you see a building restoration project is going on, and this is a building where the restoration work is done, where it is tied that the old building's characteristic must be restored, and wherever the replacement is done, the replacement is done with the you can say similar color and texture of the material. Then, if a restoration project requires an addition to the building, these changes must be proven through historical documentation and physical proof. The restoration avoids conjecture or guesswork, and adding details that are not proven to have existed will only damage the value of the building and significance of the site. If the building design did not exist in the period selected, it will not be included in the restoration. Any treatment, this is very important, that any treatment undertaken during restoration efforts will follow the best practices for the material being treated. Treatments that will cause damage to the buildings or the historical materials within will not be used. Any treatment will affect the material, so conservators must carefully select the treatment method best for the material. For example, a brick facade will have a different treatment method from the wrought iron. Thus, it is recommended that the best practices should be followed in all restoration projects. Here we can see a best practices that is done in Pakistan, and that is done in the preservation or restoration work of or conservation work of the Lal Shehbaz Qalandar mausoleum. And here you can see different restoration works that is done in our local context, how the beautiful colors and textures and materials of the old building have recreated in this building. Here you can see the intricate details, the work of glass work, the you can say brickwork and the calligraphy and the color and texture and materials all are being used and restored the building. Here you see the final touch. This is the project which is done in Pakistan. Here you can see the interior of the mausoleum, how the restoration is work is done in so detail. So for construction engineers, it's very important that we should look into the details, as much detail as possible. You see how beautiful they have preserved the Lal Shahbaz Qalandar mausoleum. This is a night view of the place. So after looking at the work of restoration and conservation in Lal Shahbaz Qalandar's mausoleum, it is very important for us because that is the cultural heritage site of Sindh. And cultural heritage sites are very important. We must have a knowledge and understanding about the cultural heritage site. And for the in today's lecture, the last thing is to understand the cultural heritage sites. So what are cultural heritage sites? The cultural heritage is the physical and emotional reflection of a society, their legacy, and what they value. The tangible or physical representations include the material of the culture, the locations of the cultural significance, and the community associated with the culture. So intangible representation include the oral stories, the tradition and emotional connection to the cultural ancestor. As you can see that Lal Shiva's calendar is very important personality and people have a sense of belongingness to him. And his mausoleum's restoration become very significant for them because it is the cultural heritage of Sindh. Then the conservation and restoration of cultural heritage site pose different challenges and often follow different guidelines because of the designation of a heritage site. The United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization UNESCO is a guiding resource in the conservation of cultural heritage sites. UNESCO's mission is to identify, protect, and preserve World Heritage Sites. So they have created a World Heritage List. There are so many buildings all around the world which is considered as the World Heritage. And World Heritage List is constantly evolving as new sites of cultural significance and buildings are added. Another great resource for restoration of cultural heritage sites is the World Monuments Fund, which focuses on working with local groups around the world, providing support for the restoration, preservation, and stewardship of the old buildings. So restoration of historic buildings is another significant area which must be having understanding or for which we must have an understanding. The restoration of historic buildings varies from country to country, just as the cultural heritage sites are also varied from country to country and other building projects. Before any work is done on a historical building, the conservator or restorers should consult the local requirements and apply best practices as discussed above. Now in Pakistan or in Sindh especially, we have so many cultural sites and so many historical sites. We have a 5,000 years old historic, you can say, place of Mohenjo-daro. And we have so many other cultural, you can say, places in our city, in our province. So we must think about these buildings and projects and sites. For example, let's take a building example in our local context of Sindh. Can you recognize this place? This is the place of Hazrat Shah Abdul Latif Bichai, and this is the mausoleum of Shah Abdul Latif Bichai in Bidshah. So these kinds of buildings are the cultural monuments or historical buildings, and we must do preserve such buildings which have a historic characteristics or a sense of belongingness to the local context, to the local people, and the cultural asset that is available to us. and we must restore these kind of buildings. Finally, I must acknowledge the references for this lecture on architectural restoration and conservation and its impact on construction. For this lecture, I have referred these different authors and these different books and research papers and websites. And I thank all these authors, and I thank you very much for listening to the lecture. I hope you have enjoyed, and see you in the next class. Wish you good luck and goodbye.